Today I want to share with you how a miscommunication between a doctor and a nurse in a hospital led to a patient falling out of bed, hitting his head, and dying 3 weeks later. You want to know what this is about? Come join me for a moment as I share with you this remarkable information. Hi, I'm Gerry Oginski. I'm a New York medical malpractice and personal injury attorney. So now come back in time with me. This gentleman was having some sort of delirium. He was having some confusion. And now he was going into the hospital to get evaluated because his doctors believed that he had lung cancer. And now he was being worked up to find out why he was having this episode of confusion. During the course of his evaluation, the doctors felt it would be best for him to stay in bed. Now, what's the best way for him to remain in bed, especially if he's confused? The best way is to physically restrain him. Now, the doctors didn't want to do that, but they thought it was best for the patient because if he had another episode of confusion, he might get up out of bed, he might fall, he might hurt himself. So now, by restraining him to the bed, this would prevent this all from happening. So, that's exactly what they do. They physically restrain him to the bed using a device. If he has to go to the bathroom, he's got to press the call button and a nurse will come and assist him. No problem at all. He then goes to have a CAT scan done and he's brought down to the CAT scan machine, and then the technician brings him up, and it turns out they were now going to put him on a different floor in a different unit. The nurse who was tucking him in for the night had no idea that the doctors had written orders to physically restrain this patient. The nurse who was tucking him in for the night on this new floor never bothered to look at the patient's chart to see if there were any restrictions on what this patient could or could not do. So she goes ahead and tucks him in for the night, pulls up his covers, and now says goodnight to him and that somebody will be in a few hours to check his vital signs. Well, guess what? Everything was fine until a number of hours later, when somebody makes their rounds, one of the nurses, to go ahead and check on the patient's vital signs. And what do they find? They find the patient on the floor, unconscious. They find that he has a massive bleed, a massive bruise all over his face. And it's obvious that this patient somehow got from his bed to the floor and now has significant massive bruising all over his face. So now they immediately begin to evaluate him. They rush him into an x-ray. They now call a doctor. They now call a special team to come and evaluate him. And he's got problems. He's not really conscious, but he is slightly conscious. And now he doesn't remember certain things. He doesn't understand where he is. Now they've got a big problem. The doctors again realize that because of his instability, his confusion, they now physically restrain him to the bed. They now call his adult daughter to tell him what happened. Hey, by the way, I think you should come to the hospital. Your dad somehow fell out of bed, suffered an injury, and you need to come. She said, what do you mean he fell out of bed? He was supposed to be physically restrained. How is this possible? The doctors at the hospital and the nurses at the hospital never gave the family a real explanation about why or how her dad managed to fall on the floor. Nobody. It wasn't until we brought a lawsuit. It wasn't until we were in the middle of litigation did I actually learn the truth when I questioned these doctors and nurses under oath that I actually found out what happened. The doctors did exactly what they were supposed to do. They wrote the note, they wrote the order saying this patient is to be physically restrained. The problem was the nurses never got that message. The nurse on the new floor never bothered to read that order, never bothered to read that information. And as a result of that, this patient was never physically restrained. So now when he felt the need to get up to go to the bathroom, what did he do? He got up to go to the bathroom. The patient suffered a massive bleed in his head, a subdural hematoma. But because he was on blood thinner medication, they couldn't stop the bleeding internally. And they couldn't operate because of his age. It was impossible. So now what happened? This bleeding continued to grow and grow, causing him ultimately to lapse into a significant coma, and now he remained in a coma for weeks. This patient suffered multi-system organ failure as a result of the significant head trauma he suffered and died 3 weeks after this incident occurred. All of this was preventable. My medical experts confirmed that there were clear violations from the basic standards of medical care that occurred all because of this series of miscommunications, because the nurse didn't bother to follow protocol and do what she was supposed to do by reading this patient's chart, checking to make sure that there were no restrictions or problems or issues with this patient before tucking him in and saying goodnight. So why do I share this tragic story with you? I share it with you as one example of how miscommunication between medical professionals resulted improper medical care causing this patient to die. I recognize you have questions or concerns about your own matter. Well, if your matter did happen here in New York and you're thinking about bringing a lawsuit, but haven't done so yet because you still have questions that need to be answered, what I encourage you to do is pick up the phone and call me. I can answer your legal questions. This is something I do every single day, and I'd love to chat with you. You can reach me at 516-487-8207 or by email at Gerry, Gerry, at Oginski-law.com. That's it for today's video. I'm Gerry Oginski. Have a wonderful day.